Her son stood over her hospital bed and said, "You're just rotting slower than Dad did." Martha Hayes, retired nurse and widow, blinked once and smiled. Mark chuckled, certain her silence meant surrender. By nightfall, every document he counted on would be gone. She'd spent a lifetime caring for others. Now she was protecting herself. And when Mark came to collect, the law would greet him without mercy. Wait, before we go any further, I got to ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The 4-pump clicked every 11 seconds, a soft mechanical tick that had become the room's only rhythm. Elaine lay still beneath a thin white blanket, the kind that never quite warmed. Her abdomen ached, not sharply, not urgently, just enough to remind her that something had been removed. Her husband used to say that healing was just another word for being asked to wait. She didn't mind waiting, but she minded the voice at the foot of her bed. "I spoke to the hospital billing coordinator," Mark said, not looking up from his phone. "They're willing to waive some of the itemized fees if we file for long-term care transition early." Elaine turned her head slightly. Her stitches tugged. "I haven't even stood up yet." He didn't flinch. "Exactly. The recovery will be slow. And you said yourself you didn't want to be a burden." Elaine said nothing. She hadn't said that. She had said she didn't want casseroles. Jessica would have smiled and tilted her head like she cared. Mark didn't bother. He kept scrolling. "Also, the attorney still has the old deed in your name. You'll want to update that. It's all a mess right now. Not very clean." The word clean hung in the room like antiseptic. Elaine closed her eyes. She could still hear Ben's voice from one of his last memos, months before the cancer took his tongue. "If Mark ever turns cold, don't be warm. That's where they get you with your softness." When she opened her eyes again, Mark was watching her. Then he said it. "You're just rotting slower than Dad did." There was no heat in it. Just math. Just strategy. The 4 ticked once more. Elaine didn't speak, but her jaw tightened like a door sealing shut. Tasha entered moments later. Young, sturdy, observant in the way that nurse aides sometimes are when they're smart enough to play invisible. She moved around Mark without making eye contact, like he was just a coat rack in her way. "I'm here to check vitals," she said, her voice neutral. Mark took the hint and stood. "Let me know when she's more alert." Tasha didn't reply. He left. His shoes were too expensive for the floor tile. They clicked like they didn't belong. Tasha waited a beat, then gently adjusted Elaine's blankets, smoothing the corners. "Do you want your water refreshed?" Elaine nodded. Tasha crossed to the pitcher, then paused, eyes flicking toward the door. When she returned, her voice dropped just enough for the air to shift. "You okay, Mrs. Mallister?" Elaine looked at her. Really looked, not as staff, but as someone who had just watched a crime without blood. Her throat was dry when she answered. "Not yet," she said. "But I will be." That night, after the halls dimmed and the other rooms hummed with sleep and sedation, Elaine reached for her phone. The screen lit her face faintly. She opened her notes app, typed one word, Grace. Then below it, "Call tomorrow. Move everything." She stared at the text, then erased everything. Replaced it with "Undo the threads." She set the phone down, folded her hands across her stomach, and closed her eyes. Her abdomen ached. Her pride didn't. Not anymore. The taxi idled at the curb, engine ticking like it couldn't decide whether to rest or flee. Elaine stepped out carefully, one hand braced on the door, the other gripping her canvas tote. No balloons, no casseroles, just the sharp air of Boise in early spring and the slow ache of fresh stitches beneath her coat. The driver didn't offer to help with the bag. She didn't need him to. She paid in cash. No one saw her walk up the front steps, and that she thought was already telling. The door was unlocked. She paused in the threshold, scanning the hallway. The scent hit her first, lemon cleanser and something synthetic like store-brand fabric softener. Too clean, too scrubbed. The rugs had been vacuumed in perfect rows. Her wedding photo was gone from the wall. She stepped inside. The floors didn't creak where they usually did. Her hand grazed the entry table. Gone. The ceramic bowl where Ben used to drop his keys.
Gone.
The stack of gardening catalogs. The tiny brass letter opener from her mother. In their place, a minimalist tray with 3 decorative stones. Elaine closed the door quietly behind her. In the living room, the fireplace mantel had been cleared. The old clock Ben had rewired himself sat half-covered with a beige linen cloth as if ashamed of its presence. She crossed to the kitchen, opened the trash bin. The top layer was cardboard from new dish towels. Beneath that, torn greeting cards, and at the very bottom, damp with what looked like coffee, her wedding album. She reached in without hesitation, hands steady. The edge of a photo curled in her fingers. Her own face stared back from 1974, veil crooked, then grinning, a heat wave rising behind them like a blessing. Her chest constricted, not grief, not shock, something cleaner. Resolve aware. In the study, drawers hung half open like mouths mid-sentence. Files missing. An envelope marked Policy Life sat sliced in 2. Its contents gone. The USB drive she kept labeled Trust. Backup was gone from the drawer. On the desk was a sticky note in Jessica's handwriting. Put this back, she'll notice. Elaine picked it up, folded it in half, and slid it into her pocket. She walked slowly down the hall, past the half-dusted shelves, the missing painting, the closed door of the guest bedroom that was never meant to be permanent. Then she reached her room, closed the door, locked it. Saturday on the edge of the bed, she exhaled through her teeth and listened to the old house sigh around her. Aware her phone was still at her coat, she scrolled to Grace Connors, attorney, and hit call. It rang once then. Elaine, you're early. I took a cab.
A pause.
Is everything intact? No. Elaine said, eyes still on the empty picture hooks. They've already started staging me out. Another pause. Then Grace said, if we move tonight, we can undo every thread. Quiet. Full coverage. Not even a shadow left. Elaine closed her eyes. Do it quietly. I'll bring the original revocation packet, Grace said. You'll need to initial every page. I will. Grace paused again. Do you want me to notify them? Elaine opened her closet and found a plastic container, missing its lid. A note inside read, sorting your old clothes for donation. Hope that's okay.
No, she said.
They'll notice soon enough. I'll wear Phil. After she hung up, Elaine walked back into the hallway. She opened the linen closet, dug behind a stack of guest towels, and pulled out the old wooden stepstool Ben had built when Zoe was 4. She carried it into the kitchen, set it beneath the overhead cabinet, climbed slowly, not from weakness, but from intent, and opened the cabinet door. Behind a tin of expired tea and a rusted jar of cloves was her backup key set and an envelope marked, if they ever try it. She pulled it down. The sun was beginning to drop behind the neighbor's fence when Elaine stepped into the shed. The air inside smelled of soil and rust. Dim light filtered through the warped plexiglass window, painting the room in sepia. Old tools hung from pegboard hooks, their outlines ghosted by years of dust. She crossed to the corner where a stack of planters sat, some cracked, some dry as bone. She lifted the second one, the one with a faded sticker that read, Zoe, willed flowers in peeling ink. Taped underneath with weather-stiffened duct tape was a narrow black lock box, the kind no one would look for, the kind people forgot still existed. Elaine pulled it free. The metal was cold in her hands, heavy, unapologetic. Back inside, she laid the box on her bed and turned the dials to the combination Ben had once set, their wedding anniversary. Backwards, it clicked open. Inside was a tanned accordion folder labeled in Ben's sharp mechanical handwriting, Mallister Estate Final Form. Beneath it were her own Cauteasel's handwritten in blue ink, small updates, adjustments, a line added here, a name struck there, and under those, wrapped in a faded dish towel, a single envelope with her name scrolled across the front. Only give this to who honors you, Ben. Elaine traced the signature with her finger, then closed the lid again. No fire, no match. This folder would not be burned. This one would outlive them. By nightfall, Grace had arrived. She didn't knock, just stepped in through the back door like she always had, her coat dusted with pollen and her briefcase already open. Everything in one piece, she asked. Elaine poured tea into two mismatched cups, one from Ben's office, the other chipped at the handle. The shed was untouched. No one knows about the box. They sat at the dining table, the overhead light dimmed to a soft cone. Grace unfolded the documents carefully. Ben's handwriting hasn't aged a day. It's like his pen was terrified of being misread. Elaine half smiled. He used to say wills weren't legal tools. They were emotional blueprints. Grace marked each section with yellow tabs, then pulled out a newer draft of Elaine's will. We'll integrate the codicils into the final version. If anyone contests it, the signature chain is flawless. Elaine took a sip of tea. This house is not his retirement plan. Grace looked up. By the time he finds out, he won't be in it. At 9:07 p.m., Elaine's phone buzzed. Tasha, she answered on speaker. Hey, Tasha said, voice low. I figured I should tell you. Mark's been talking to staff. Said you? I had episodes. Tried to imply some confusion that maybe you shouldn't be making decisions alone. Elaine's face didn't change. Grace's eyes narrowed. That's attempted pre-incapacity framing. Exactly, Tasha said. He said it like a joke, but one of the night nurses flagged it in his visitor log. She wrote, and I quote, "Son possibly fishing for cognitive incidents. I thought you'd want it documented." I do, Elaine said. Thank you, Tasha hesitated. You okay? Elaine looked down at the open documents in front of her, at Ben's letter, at the legal structure already forming like armor around her. I'm getting there. They hung up in steady. Grace leaned back in her chair, voice calm but surgical. We'll get ahead of it. Medical authority, durable PA, notarized healthcare directive, full firebreak. Elaine nodded slowly, then reached for a fresh sheet of paper. I want to reward the living trust title. Something colder, something that doesn't pretend it forgives. Grace handed her a pen. You always did write like you were writing for court. I am, Elaine said. Elaine sat in the half-light of her bedroom, the folder from the shed open on her lap, a cup of tea cooling on the nightstand. Outside, the porch light clicked on automatically, a quiet habit she hadn't turned off, even when she was in the hospital. Her phone buzzed once, a reminder she didn't set. Ben, voice memo. The 12th of June. She had forgotten it was still in rotation. Her thumb hovered, then tapped. The room filled with his voice. If Mark ever turns cold, don't be warm. The pause after the sentence was the part that gutted her. Ben had always left space for her to fill in her own answers. He never tried to convince her. Just named the weather and trusted she'd choose the right coat. You don't owe someone love just because you gave it once. That's not duty. That's debt.
And you don't die in debt, Elaine.
That's not your legacy. The memo ended in a faint cough, then static. Elaine didn't cry loudly. She didn't crumble. She just blinked. And two slow tears traced down each cheek, clean and unannounced. She wiped them with the sleeve of her cardigan. Not because she was broken, but because she was ready. In the dining room, Grace sat with her laptop open and sleeves rolled. Her posture, as always, was clinical, but her eyes held something personal now. Respect strategy. She pointed to the screen. If you want this airtight, we go full asset redirection. Not just a revocation of access, a total rechaining. Elaine nodded. I want no ambiguity. Not in the house, not in the land, not in the account names. Grace pulled up the deed template. We'll rename the house trust. Something neutral, but sealed. You can change the beneficiary schedule anytime, but it will take a court order to break. Elaine handed over her old binder. Grace flipped it open. I'll overwrite this with the new terms. And while I'm at it, she began retyping the healthcare proxy. Elaine looked toward the hallway. I want Tasha listed as my medical agent, primary effective immediately. Grace raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I trust her, and she listens. Grace didn't ask again, just nodded and typed. Milo arrived at 7:04. Same brown vest, same slow knock. His notary bag was worn at the seams, but his hands were steady. He didn't ask why she needed everything notarized tonight. He'd known Elaine since before Zoe was born. He'd watched Ben fix his fence without ever charging him. He saw more than he said. Elaine set out the papers. Milo read the first signature page, glanced up, then signed and stamped with his small, deliberate nod. "A lot of people don't do this until it's too late," he said softly. Elaine offered him a slice of lemon cake she defrosted that morning. "We're not a too-late family anymore." He took the cake, said nothing else. At the kitchen table, the final draft of Elaine's revised will sat on thick cream-colored paper. For clauses, each one written with razor precision. She signed the third clause with a slow exhale. Full financial disinheritance with no right to contest. Then the fourth, it read simply Clause 4, irrevocable after death. This clause is not subject to amendment, redirection, or familial claim once executed and filed. Elaine's signature beneath it was smoother than her hand felt. But it didn't matter. It was done. Later, she stood at the edge of her front porch, the folder locked in a fireproof bag at her side. A spring wind moved through the trees, brushing the porch swing like an old friend, unsure if it was still welcome. Behind her, the house felt sealed. Not empty, not guarded, just hers. The knock came at 11:02 a.m. Not timid, not questioning, the kind of knock made by someone who already thought he owned what was on the other side. Elaine opened the door without expression. Mark stood in a crisp collared shirt, sunglasses perched in his hair like he'd been waiting for a golf tee time. Behind him, a woman in a mauve pantsuit held a leather-bound folio against her chest. "Morning," Mark said breezily. "Thought we'd stop by, take a few measurements." Elaine stepped back without a word. The woman introduced herself as Callie from Lakeside Realty, smiling too wide for a Wednesday. "We've done a lot of these generational transitions," she said. "We're thinking soft remodel, just cosmetic. Unless you're open to letting the wall between the kitchen and den go." Elaine said nothing. Callie stepped into the living room and paused. "Oh, and we'd probably resurface the fireplace. That stacked stone look is a little heavy for the younger market." Mark glanced at his phone. "We'll be out of your hair quick. She's got a stager coming by tomorrow just to consult." Nothing finalized. Elaine walked slowly to the chair beside the window and sat, one hand folded in her lap. The other rested on the armrest like she was listening to a sermon she didn't believe in. "Kitchen's obviously a gut," Kelly continued. "If you want it marketable, we open that wall, throw in a waterfall island. This place will list above asking without blinking." Mark nodded toward the hallway. "She'll be moved to assisted living by spring. Something near Foothill Village, probably smaller, easier." Elaine looked at the photo frame still sitting on the mantel. The one of her and Ben in front of the house holding a sign that said sold, their hands still dusty from garden work. It was the only photo Mark hadn't thrown out. She picked it up, stood, and walked into the kitchen. That night, the light above the dining table buzzed faintly. Elaine sat across from Grace, who was already drafting. "He didn't ask if you were okay, did he?" Grace said, without looking up. Elaine poured 2 cups of tea. "Number. He just brought someone who priced my life like a flip." Grace slid a form across the table. "This is a restriction of sale clause. You sign here, and it freezes listing authority for 15 years. No one can sell, broker, or refinance without a full beneficiary consensus, which currently is one person. You." Elaine signed without hesitation. Grace flipped to the next page. "And this is the deed transfer to the private trust. The title will reflect a name that means nothing to them. Cedar Watch Holdings." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a shell company." "It is," Grace said. "Yours." By 10:45 the next morning, the documents were filed with the Ada County Clerk's office. Elaine watched from her laptop as the confirmation page loaded. Her house, her land, now shielded behind layers of legal fog. Ben would have approved, not because he didn't love Mark, but because he loved boundaries more. At noon, Mark texted her. "Did the stager come by today?" Callie said she left her lighting board. Elaine didn't reply. She forwarded the message to Grace, who responded with a single sentence. "He can appraise all he wants. He'll never own it." At dusk, Elaine stood at the edge of her front yard. The trees Ben planted were blooming late this year, slow and defiant. She bent to clip a branch of lilac, carried it inside, and placed it in a chipped vase by the front door.
The sunroom faced east.
It always had. Ben used to call it their morning landing pad, where they'd sit with tea and decide whether the day was worth investing in. Most days were, but some were meant to be endured. Elaine moved the reading chair there herself. The cushions were faded, but firm. She angled it slightly, not toward the window, but toward the warmth. She thumbtacked a small hand-drawn sign to the doorframe. No visitors without invitation. Underneath, in smaller ink, this includes family. Then she sat. Not because she was tired, but because she was done being reachable by people who weren't reaching to understand her. Grace stopped by that afternoon with a thin manila envelope. She placed it on the kitchen table with no ceremony, just precision.
Marked and filed, she said.
All liquid assets have been redirected to the Northwest Women's Endowment. The language is sealed. There's no way around it. Elaine nodded, eyes on the envelope. They'll call it cruel. They'll call it unfair, Grace said, because they thought it was already theirs. Elaine smiled faintly. It never was. Grace left soon after. No goodbyes, just the weight of the envelope, sitting between a ceramic teapot and a house built from refusal. That evening, Elaine reviewed her burial instructions. She deleted the line about a eulogy, deleted the word service, and left only one request: private cremation.
No announcements, no invitations.
Under requested speaker, she wrote not applicable. My record speaks for itself. She signed it, sealed it, and filed it behind the birth certificate Ben had kept in a separate folder. Proof we began, he once said. Now Elaine had written the end. 2 days later, her inbox pinged from Jessica Mallister. Subject: quick help body. Hey, just trying to prep early for tax season. Can you send over account access? I can handle the filing on your behalf, like last year. Hope you're feeling better. Elaine read it twice, then closed the browser. No reply, no fight, just deletion. She didn't need to block them. She'd already outgrown them. The next morning, Sandy knocked at the side door holding a paper bag that smelled like soup and garlic bread. I made extra, she said. And my daughter said you inspire her with that article in the newsletter last month. Elaine blinked. I didn't write an article.
You didn't have to, Sandy said.
You're just living one. They didn't talk long, but Elaine watched her walk away with something close to gratitude in her chest. Not for the food, but for the way some people bring themselves to your door without asking for anything in return. A dinner was quiet. Elaine ate in the sunroom, legs tucked beneath her, the sign still hanging near the door. The soup was warm. The bread was soft. The chair didn't creak when she shifted. She sipped her tea and looked out at the garden, where the light bled gently over the edges of the hedges Ben had once trimmed with religious exactness. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She wasn't bracing anymore. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone, just unbothered. Later, she opened a fresh page in her journal. She wrote only 3 lines. They offered nothing while I healed. So, I learned to mend without them. Now they don't know how to find me, and I don't need to be found. She closed the journal and turned off the porch light. The courtroom was nearly empty, just padded benches, a clock that ticked too loud, and the clean click of Grace's heels as she crossed to the bench with a binder tucked tight under one arm. Elaine walked slowly behind her, not frail, just measured. Her coat was buttoned, her hair pinned, her eyes leveled. Mark sat 2 rows ahead, shoulders stiff. His lawyer, a man with a thin tie and thinner voice, didn't stand when they entered. That told Elaine everything she needed to know. Grace set the binder down on the clerk's table. Supplemental exhibit, she said. Certified medical evaluations from Dr. Hild and Dr. Lee filed within the last 10 days. Both affirm full cognitive competency. The judge didn't look surprised. She flipped through the pages like someone waiting for the formality to end. Mark's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, we're still concerned about patterns of confusion, emotional volatility, her sudden financial reallocation. She's 71, the judge said flatly. Not 107. And I've seen more confused behavior from adult children who feel entitled to inherit things they didn't earn. Mark shifted in his seat, face hardening. The judge looked at Elaine. Would you like to say anything? Elaine shook her head. I think the paperwork already did. She sat. Mark's lawyer looked at him. Mark said nothing. The judge made it quick. Petition denied with prejudice. If any future filings suggest incapacity without new evidence, they'll be sanctioned.
She stood. So did Elaine.
Grace packed the binder away like she was folding up a sword. Back home, Elaine took off her coat and hung it neatly in the foyer. Then she walked to the old desktop in the study. It powered on slow, just as it always had. She opened a folder labeled Final Docs, selected everything, and dragged it to the trash, then emptied it. The digital whoosh of deletion was quieter than expected. Next, she logged into every cloud account she still remembered, updated the passwords one by one, saving them to a private offline ledger, the kind you don't recover with facial recognition. When she was done, she sat back and exhaled. Some things aren't protected until they're erased. That evening, she pulled out one of Ben's old journals. His handwriting was rigid, all uppercase, like he'd never stopped drafting blueprints. She skimmed an entry from 1996. Mark got into the garage again, rearranged the tool shelf, swore it was to help, but I think he wanted control. Even at 16, he's calculating. Elaine reread the last line twice. Then she tore the page out slowly. Another page marked at 24 recommending they sell the cabin before her surgery. Another, a proposal from Jessica about moving their accounts to a joint family portfolio. She didn't rip them all, just the ones that stopped being warnings and became confirmations. The shredder hummed softly as the past turned into confetti. Tasha arrived just after 6 o'clock with a canvas tote full of snacks and a portable scanner.
Hope you're ready, she said.
Because I brought backup cookies. Elaine handed her a thumb drive already labeled Trust Archive. Final. They sat side by side at the kitchen table, feeding one page at a time through the scanner. Updated will, durable POA, deed assignments, medical declarations. Tasha didn't ask questions, just made sure each file was named with precision. You know, she said as the last page slid through, some people spend their whole lives hoping someone will protect them. Elaine sipped her tea. And some people spend their lives learning to protect themselves.
She paused.
I just waited longer than I should have. They finished just before sunset. Elaine walked Tasha to the door, handed her a small jar of marmalade from Ben's old recipe. Still sweet after all this? Tasha smiled. Elaine shook her head. No, just honest how we play. The courthouse air was too cold for spring. Elaine stepped through the glass doors with no cane, no handler, no hesitation. Her coat was gray, her posture straight enough to write contracts against. Grace walked beside her, leather binder clutched like a quiet verdict. Lucidity and legal soundness, the spine red, labeled cleanly. Exhibits AM. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. How we play. Courtroom 4C smelled faintly of old upholstery and new panic. Mark sat at the front table alone today.
No, Jessica.
His lawyer was different. A younger man, with a more aggressive haircut and less sweat than the last one. Elaine took her seat behind the respondent placard. She placed her reading glasses on the table with calm precision. Mark turned as if waiting for a tremor in her hands. There wasn't one.
He looked away.
How we play. The judge, a man in his 50s, clear-eyed and not easily impressed, donned his robe and began without ceremony. We're here today for a review petition regarding the guardianship status and mental competency of Elaine M. Mallister. He glanced down at the docket filed by her son, Mark A. Mallister. Mark's lawyer rose. Your Honor, we'd like to present concerns regarding behavioral drift. My client has witnessed increasing isolation, financial rigidity, and potential paranoia, particularly in how estate resources are being directed away from family. He gestured toward Elaine without looking at her. She's made large-scale reallocations under suspect influence, possibly from household staff. Elaine didn't blink. The judge turned to Grace. Miss Connors? Grace opened the binder like a surgeon opening a chest. Your Honor, you'll find exhibits A through M document Miss Mallister's full cognitive evaluations from 2 independent physicians, annotated investment portfolios, bank login with timestamped IP addresses, and a 5-month ledger of her own annotations cross-referencing market movement with her trust activity. She turned one page, tapping lightly. And here is a printed copy of her personal asset management notes, handwritten by Miss Mallister, reviewed by both her financial advisor and physician. The judge took the binder, flipped through it, read, then looked at Elaine. "Do you wish to add anything?" Elaine reached into her purse and withdrew a small spiral notebook. She flipped it open to a page dated 3 weeks prior. "I logged a 6% increase in my mid-growth mutual fund on the 3rd of March, she said clearly. Shifted allocation to low-risk bonds on the 6th, took advantage of the municipal bond dip on the 9th. I made the trades myself online between 10:12 and 10:34 a.m. She looked up. "Would you like the browser history?" A faint chuckle drifted from the gallery, one woman in the second row. The judge didn't react. He looked at Mark. Mark shifted, visibly uncertain for the first time.
His lawyer began to speak.
The judge raised a hand. "No need. I've read enough." He closed the binder slowly. "There's no evidence of incapacity here. None. Petition denied with prejudice." He paused, tapping the gavel once, not twice. "And let me say something clearly. Aging is not incompetence. Managing your own affairs is not paranoia, and this court will not be used to bully the competent into silence." He stood. So did Elaine. Outside, the clouds had thickened. Rain threatened but hadn't landed yet. Elaine pulled a compact umbrella from her bag and opened it with one clean snap. She said nothing, didn't look back. Grace matched her stride. "Think he'll try again?" Grace asked. Elaine stepped onto the curb, eyes forward. He didn't prepare for this one. And the next. Elaine adjusted the strap of her purse. There won't be a next. Back home, she changed into house shoes, boiled water, and opened her calendar. The next 3 days were blank. For the first time in years, the emptiness didn't feel like loss. It felt like design. The knock came around 11 a.m. light, 2 taps, a rhythm that didn't assume entry. Elaine opened the door to find Zoe standing with a canvas backpack and no script in her eyes. "I brought tea," she said. "The kind with the weird flower that opens in hot water." Elaine stepped aside. "Then, let's make it bloom." They sat in the sunroom, light spilling across the table in golden streaks. Zoe tucked her legs beneath her, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Mom says, you've changed," she said, sipping. Elaine stirred her cup once. I stopped apologizing." Zoe nodded slowly, like the answer wasn't surprising, just overdue. She glanced toward the bookshelf. "You still have the photo albums?" Elaine stood, pulled 2 down from the middle shelf, and slid them across the table. Zoe opened one, her hand reverent. Old Polaroids and matte prints, some yellowed with time. Ben in coveralls, bent over the garden. Elaine in oversized sunglasses, holding a puppy Zoe didn't remember. Zoe paused on one photo. Elaine and Ben under the willow tree. They weren't smiling, just standing close, their fingers barely touching, like they knew what mattered. They didn't need to perform. "Did you love him right away?"
Zoe asked.
Elaine blinked. "No, I trusted him. And then the love had somewhere to land." Zoe didn't answer, but her hand hovered on the photo longer than the rest. Elaine returned with a worn leather journal. The cover was embossed with vines, the edges weathered from decades of garden dirt and fingerprints. "This was your grandfather's," she said, handing it over. "Every tree he planted, every season. Notes on what survived and what didn't." Zoe opened to the first page. Neat cursive labeled entries. A drawn sketch of the backyard map from 1993. "I didn't know he was so thorough," she said, almost whispering. Elaine smiled softly. "He believed roots needed memory." Zoe turned to the back. A final page marked spring. Contingent notes in Ben's writing. "If this land ever gets claimed without care, let her be louder than I ever was." She looked up. He said, "You used to be too quiet." Elaine's eyes didn't flicker. "I was never silent, just underestimated." They spent the afternoon planting bulbs, not because they had to, but because the weather held and the ground was ready. Zoe knelt without gloves. Elaine showed her how to space tulips for the best bloom come April. At one point, Zoe looked up and said, "I think you're the strongest woman I know." Elaine pressed a bulb into the soil. "Then watch closely, so you don't have to learn it late." Zoe nodded once. She already was. Inside, Elaine packed the journal into a gift box lined with tissue paper. She added a note handwritten in pen that Zoe had gifted her one birthday long ago. This wasn't meant for just anyone. It was meant for someone who noticed. "I've been waiting for you to notice." Zoe took the box with both hands. She didn't say, "Thank you." She just held it like something alive. After dinner, Elaine poured a second cup of tea. Zoe sat back in the chair, gaze drifting to the window. "I think Mom's scared of you now," she said, unblinking. Elaine raised her mug. Then she's finally paying attention. The letter came folded in thirds, slipped through the brass slot of Elaine's front door without a knock or buzz. There was no return address, just her name written in that unhurried, too familiar script Mark used when he thought sincerity might earn him something. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she left it on the entry table beside the garden shears and the small ceramic bowl where Ben used to keep his cufflinks. The paper sat there for most of the morning while Elaine washed dishes by hand, trimmed the dying rosemary, and swept the patio in slow, deliberate strokes. Letting it wait was part of the answer. By noon, she'd read it once, then again, then not at all. It wasn't a letter, really, not in any emotional sense. It was a proposition written with the tone of someone who believed dignity could be negotiated, and loss could be softened with just the right phrasing. Mark's words bent around polite terms like resolution and clarity. He suggested they meet in the middle and offered to revisit previous assumptions. There was a sentence about protecting what's left of the relationship and an offer to oversee financial transitions with efficiency. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just white space between lines where ownership was trying to hide. Elaine refolded the letter and slid it into a new envelope. Not the one it came in, one that wouldn't come back. That afternoon, Grace sat in Elaine's sunroom, a legal pad balanced on one knee and her reading glasses perched low on her nose. The light poured in diagonally, catching the edge of her pen as it moved across the paper in quiet strokes. "I'll draft a formal rejection," she said. "Direct, clean. No room for follow-up." Elaine poured tea into both their cups. "Make sure it uses the word entitlement. He'll understand that." Grace nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'll include the revised Cotiso language as well, just to underscore that nothing is open for reinterpretation." "No negotiation, no entitlement." Elaine stirred her tea once, not because it needed it, but because her hands were steadier when they moved with purpose.
Good.
He's used to carving Grace's space into loopholes. Grace didn't disagree. She just kept writing. That same evening, Elaine opened the folder marked Medical Authority Updated. She removed the previous designation, the one that years ago had listed Mark as her emergency contact back when default had masqueraded as loyalty. With careful hands, she slid the new notarized form into place, the one with Tasha's name at the top, typed clean and permanent. Beside it, a copy of the healthcare directive, countersigned and date-stamped. Tasha had accepted, without ceremony. When Elaine handed her the documents earlier that week, Tasha had simply nodded and said, "I've got you." Not, "I'll take care of you." Just got a word that held without clinging. The next morning, Elaine stood at the mailbox with a small padded envelope addressed to Mark. Inside it, she'd placed a single piece of cream stationery, folded twice and unsigned. The message read, "This will not be salvaged. Not in court, not in language, not in gesture. The inheritance was human first. You lost that." She dropped it into the mailbox without pause. There was no ceremony in endings, only clarity. When Grace called later that day to confirm the rejection letter had been emailed and hand-delivered to Mark's legal representative, she sounded neither triumphant nor burdened, only sure. "He won't respond to this," Grace said. "At least not with words. He'll let it rot." Elaine's reply was soft but certain. "He was my son," she said. but I outgrew the role of his mother.
There was a pause on the line.
Grace said nothing, and in that silence, something like relief settled between them. Not release, but confirmation. That evening, Elaine walked through the house with a cloth in one hand, wiping down surfaces slowly, not out of necessity, but ritual. The brass fixtures in the hallway, the doorknobs, the edge of the desk where Ben used to balance his ledger. Each motion rewrote a line they had once crossed together, and now she was writing alone. By the time she reached the front hallway, the envelope was gone, the table was clean, and the lock on the door had been changed, just in case. The first text came from a former neighbor, someone Elaine hadn't spoken to since the neighborhood block party 7 summers ago. Elaine, I just saw the post. Are you okay?
I'm so sorry.
Then another, a cousin from the Oregon side of the family. Is that true what Mark wrote? You've been hospitalized again? Elaine's phone buzzed quietly, steadily, as if grief had found a rhythm and set it on loop. She didn't open social media. She didn't have to. The shape of the fallout was already forming. It was Grace who confirmed it. She called mid-morning with clipped breath and sharper tone. Mark's gone public. Elaine stood by the window, the shears still drawn, sunlight a faint suggestion on her slippers. What does that mean? It means he posted a 4-paragraph sob story to Facebook and LinkedIn. Called it, "Watching Our Parents Decline When They Don't Let You Help." He names no one, but the comments do the rest. Jessica's tagging people. The tone is surgical. You're frail, confused, isolated. He's the devoted son making hard choices. Elaine sat down in her armchair. The cushion let out a soft sigh beneath her. And people believe it. Grace hesitated. Some do. The ones who need a villain they can imagine in their own family. The rest? They're just resharing it. Elaine looked out the window at the branches swaying just beyond the glass. They can have the story, she said finally, but they can't have the truth. That afternoon, Zoe posted a single sentence on her private account. No photos, no hashtags, just this. She was discarded while healing. I was there. There were no responses, just acknowledgments, quiet ones. Some with hearts, others with quiet replies that never sent. Zoe didn't screenshot anything. She didn't argue in the comments. She didn't have to. Elaine didn't post a rebuttal. She didn't issue a counter-narrative. She went to her desk, opened a blank document, and began typing in the font Ben used for his garden maps. By the next morning, a guest op-ed submission had been accepted by the Idaho Record. Title: Respect is Not a Shared Inheritance by Elaine M. Mallister. It wasn't fiery. It didn't name names. It didn't weep or scold. It did something far worse to people like Mark. It made itself impossible to refute. There are those who believe elderhood is an exit, a quiet retreat from purpose. But aging is not surrender. It is not consent to be managed like a spreadsheet. And dignity is not a resource to be handed down only to those who remain palatable. We are not burdens. We are archives. And we are not here to be silenced by those who never bothered to ask what we remember. It published quietly. No media storm, no backlash, but the ripple was exact. 2 days later, Jessica deleted her Instagram and locked her Facebook profile. By the end of the week, Mark's original post had disappeared, too. No retraction, no apology, just an absence, a digital blank space where a fabricated narrative used to live. Elaine didn't gloat. She watered her plants, swept the entry hall, and ordered a new copy of the article printed on archival paper to slide behind her legal binder for Zoe someday. Late that week, a letter arrived from Vermont, typed on creamy stationery, the envelope addressed in a neat hand. Elaine opened it at the kitchen table, her tea cooling beside her. Dear Miss Mallister, I read your piece in the Record. You reminded me that I can still choose who gets the pieces of me. That I don't have to explain to anyone why I said no to the people who once called me mom and now call me problem.
I'm 78.
I left my son's name off the new will yesterday. I thought I was alone in that. I'm not anymore. Elaine folded the letter carefully, slid it into the back of her journal, and wrote one line beneath it. The truth doesn't have to shout. It just has to remain. That night, Elaine stood by the window and watched the porch light flicker on. No knock, no drama, just the stillness of being untouchable and the knowledge that this time's silence had won. Elaine stood in the cemetery office, quiet but composed, her paperwork already sorted into 2 crisp folders. The woman behind the plexiglass divider, mid-40s, polite without warmth, skimmed the forms twice before reaching for her stamp. "Final interment directives?" she asked. Elaine nodded. "Yes, and the adjacent plot clause is included." The clerk raised her eyebrows slightly, but didn't ask. She pressed the red seal onto the corner of the page, then slid a copy into an envelope labeled M. Callister. "Do not alter." Elaine took it, slipped it into her canvas bag beside a grocery list, and a pair of gloves still damp from weeding. She walked the perimeter of the burial garden once before leaving. No names allowed, no sentiment left exposed, just quiet ground and a single pre-engraved plaque already set for herself. Elaine Mishima Mallister, 1949, built quiet, held strong. There was space beside it, but not access. Not anymore. That evening, back at the kitchen table, Grace opened her laptop and rotated the screen toward Elaine. "This is the codicil revision," she said. "Filed, timestamped, verified. No adjacent burial unless pre-authorized with notarized consent. No proxy signovs. It has to come from you directly. It doesn't come at all." Elaine signed the confirmation form, then wiped the pen between her fingers like it was made of something delicate. That should discourage any posthumous entitlement. Grace didn't smile, but she did nod. "It's called a breach lock clause for a reason. I don't want him near the garden," Elaine said plainly. Grace knew better than to ask which garden. Later, with the dusk settling over the living room in long blue shadows, Elaine handed Zoe a wooden box the size of a shoebox. It was heavier than it looked. "What is this?" Zoe asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Open it." Inside, envelopes, dozens of them, all stamped, labeled donations in Ben's name. Small ones spread across library funds, garden education programs, low-income women's housing nonprofits. "I've been sending a few each week," Elaine said. "No one big gesture, just movement. It adds up." Zoe ran her fingers over one envelope addressed to a seed bank in Wisconsin. "They'll remember him." That was the point. On her way out, Zoe paused at the edge of the yard. "Did you get a letter from Uncle Mark's lawyer?" Elaine met her gaze evenly. "Yes, he wants to visit." "I know." Zoe waited, unsure if she should press. Elaine reached for the garden spade resting on the fence post. "He doesn't get to ask for an audience in the same mouth that tried to erase me." Zoe hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." That night, Elaine sat alone in the sunroom with a folder of cemetery documents in her lap. The porch light was off. She liked how the dark kept company without asking for anything. The file was closed, the signatures were dry, and still she opened it one more time. Inside, tucked between the burial directive and the updated deed, was a letter she hadn't read since Ben's funeral, handwritten, untitled. It began with one sentence. "If they turn you into paperwork, remind them you are the one holding the pen." She didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. She just folded the letter again and returned it to its place deep in the folder beneath the parts of herself they'd never find. Early the next morning, Milo arrived with a fresh notary seal and 2 cups of coffee. Elaine offered him a seat at the porch table, already cleared except for one blank page. "This one's different," she said. "It's not about trust structure. It's not about assets." Milo sipped his coffee, waited. Elaine dipped the pen, then began to write. "I hereby restrict all posthumous claims of lineage, burial adjacency, or fiduciary inclusion to the names specified in Appendix A." She looked up and added, "Appendix A is one name." Milo took the pen when she passed it to him. "Zoe," Elaine nodded. "Only Zoe." And just outside, tucked behind the garden gate, a padded envelope sat waiting, unmarked, unclaimed. From Mark's lawyer, subject line, "Final request, one last conversation." Elaine didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. He had found the last place to look, and still he was too late. The calendar changed, without comment. Spring turned to summer, then fall, each season brushing past without interruption. The wind carried fewer questions. The mail held no more surprises. Mark's name hadn't surfaced in months. Elaine didn't mark the anniversary of his silence. She simply noticed it. One afternoon, while clearing her inbox, a headline slid past in the news ticker of her browser. Local tech consultant finalizes quiet divorce after 16 years. The image was unmistakable. Mark in a wrinkled navy jacket, face pulled tight with performance. Jessica beside him, sunglasses too large for her expression. There was no statement, just the line. No children, no comment. Elaine didn't click. She brewed tea and returned to the window to check which bulbs had survived the last frost. 2 weeks later, Grace arrived with a fresh binder embossed in soft navy leather. Elaine met her at the back patio table where the sun struck sideways through the pergola and caught on the rim of her teacup. "This version will hold until the end," Grace said, handing it over. "No more contingencies, no more alternate paths." Elaine opened to the third tab where the line read, "Successor Trustee Zoe Mallister 100%. Elaine ran her finger under the line once, then signed beneath it. "She's ready," she said. Even if she doesn't know it yet, Grace didn't argue. She will. The dinner came in late May. Not a party, not an event, just a gathering under string lights in the garden Ben once tilled by hand. Zoe helped set the table with stoneware plates, cotton napkins folded without flourish. Tasha arrived with lemon bars still warm in the tray. Milo brought wine. Sandy wore a shirt that said, "Compost is rebellion," and laughed before anyone had even poured a drink. There were no toasts, just shared bread. Slow conversation, the sound of knives against ceramic. They ate until the candles melted low, and the lilacs in the corner swayed, without need for comment. Elaine didn't say much, but her eyes moved from face to face like a ledger, slowly balancing. Later that week, she pulled out the emergency contact forms that had once lived behind the pantry in a red accordion folder. She crossed out Mark's name with a pen that didn't hesitate. No whiteout, no replacement line beneath it, just a new entry on a fresh form. Primary contact, Zoe Mallister, mobile ending in 89. She slid it into the front gate file and dropped a copy off with the security office near the neighborhood entrance. The man behind the counter didn't blink at the change. Just initialed the update and filed it behind the plastic divider marked McAllister E. As she left, she noticed how quiet her own breath felt. That night, Elaine sat beside the garden bed, running soil between her fingers while the porch light hummed behind her. Zoe came out barefoot carrying 2 cups of mint tea. She handed one over, then said softly, "I think I'm where I'm supposed to be." Elaine didn't answer right away. She took a sip, then set the cup down and looked at her granddaughter, not the child Zoe had once been, but the woman she was quietly becoming. "You were always the part one was never afraid of," she said. "Even when I didn't know why," Zoe blinked. "Is that what this is? A handoff?" Elaine smiled. "It's not a handoff." She gestured to the garden. "It's a turn in the soil." Agreed. Back inside, Elaine pulled down an old wooden box from the top shelf of her study. It smelled faintly of cedar and ink. She opened it. Inside, a single photo of Ben planting the first sapling in the yard. Next to it, Zoe's drawing of the memorial plaque. She closed the lid gently, then whispered into the stillness of the room. "Names can fade, but this grows." Outside, the garden lights blinked on, and somewhere across town, Mark scrolled through a feed that no longer spoke his name. The world hadn't turned against him. It had just stopped turning for him. Mark hadn't just lost access. He'd lost witness. The story no longer needed his chapter. It had written a new one. With Zoe at the center, the pen felt heavier than it used to. Elaine sat at the dining table while Grace laid out the final deed transfer. The edge of the paper aligned perfectly with the grain in the wood. Sunlight streamed through the west window, catching on the glass jar of garden scissors and the small jade plant Zoe had brought by last week. Grace pointed to the line at the bottom of the page. "This one finalizes the home title into the Cedar Watch Trust," she said. "Zoe will inherit as sole occupant." No sale, no refinance, no split equity. It stays with her. Elaine reached for the pen. The ink moved smoothly, confident, familiar.
No hesitation.
No second signature needed. Just hers. Zoe called the project route line. It started as a blog, then became a collective, then something more. Women wrote in from across the state, some from the next block. Others from cities Elaine had never been to, sending stories of disinheritance, reinvention, and quiet resilience. Some had left behind abusive spouses. Some had restructured wills. Some had simply said no to people who had always counted on their silence. Elaine read each one with slow attention, her glasses perched low, a cup of honey tea cooling beside her. They weren't dramatic. They were exact. Zoe wrote the mission statement in one sentence. A route isn't a chain. It's a choice. When the downtown library invited Elaine to speak at their spring equity panel, she almost declined, but Zoe had already RSVP'd on her behalf. It's just 10 minutes, she'd said. Read whatever you want or don't. Elaine stood beneath a low, arched ceiling. The microphone set too tall until a volunteer quietly adjusted it. She brought only one page folded in thirds, the same way Mark's letter once had been. She read slowly. It was never about revenge. It was about removal. The parts that rot. The people who hollow. The illusion that blood is a guarantee of kindness. Inheritance in the end is not about money. It's about who still shows up after the door has stayed shut. There was no applause, just the sound of pens moving. One woman weeping quietly in the second row. Elaine stepped down without lingering. The following Sunday, Milo showed up with a can of paint, a rag, and an old drop cloth rolled under his arm. I don't take commissions, he said, but I do take instruction. Elaine opened the screen door. Muted blue. Something that doesn't ask for attention, but doesn't flinch from it either.
He grinned.
That's specific. So is the history it's covering. He painted for 3 hours, didn't say much except to ask about the type of wood and whether she wanted gloss or matte. By the time he packed up, the front door gleamed a quiet blue-gray. New, but not loud. You deserve a house that breathes, he said, wiping his hands. Elaine didn't thank him, just held the door open as he left. Atasha stopped by the next day, documents in hand and eyes still wide with nerves. I submitted my application, she said, to work under Grace as a paralegal in training. Elaine tilted her head. You worried she'll say no?
No, Tasha replied.
I'm worried I won't live up to what you trusted me with. Elaine reached for her hand just briefly. You already did. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her advanced medical directive. The form hadn't changed. The space for her handwriting hadn't either. She filled it in slowly. Full name, contact, directive terms. Then in the final line, she added a sentence beneath the default print. Any decision made in my name must be made by someone who stayed when there was nothing left to take. She signed her name. The pen left a faint impression on the wood beneath the paper. Outside, the blue front door dried in the last of the sun. A breeze shifted the curtains. Elaine looked toward the hallway where a photo of Ben still hung, not centered, but right where it always had been, slightly tilted, undisturbed. On her nightstand sat Zoe's Route Line newsletter, folded open to a story written by someone named Arlene in Montana. I thought I had to leave my house to be free, but now I know I just had to stop leaving the key under the mat. Elaine ran her finger under that line twice, then closed the page and turned off the lamp. The door no longer waited to be knocked on. It simply stood, painted, locked, claimed. The voicemail came just after sunrise. Elaine stood in the garden, hands deep in the rose bed, clipping back the frostbitten limbs before they hardened for good. Her phone buzzed in the apron pocket. She didn't check it right away. The soil was cool and damp, the way it always felt before bloom. She finished the last branch, laid the shears on the stone bench, and only then fished the phone out. Hi, this is Dana from Foothill Medical. We wanted to let you know your son, Mark Mallister, was admitted early this morning. He listed you as an emergency contact if you'd like to call back. Elaine pressed delete. The garden didn't pause for her. Neither did she. Inside, She washed her hands slowly, letting the warm water rinse away the dirt and something older than dirt. On the windowsill, Zoe's last root line printout curled faintly at the edges in the steam. She reached for her journal, the one with the linen cover and the faint ink smudge across the spine. Open to the final page. She didn't rush. She wrote in her original hand, neat, cursive, deliberate loops. Some things you leave, others you lock. Both are survival. She capped the pen and didn't open the journal again. That afternoon, Zoe arrived with a small bag of groceries and a new tin of jasmine tea. She didn't ask if Elaine had heard anything, didn't bring up hospitals,
Didn't mention family.
They sat on the porch and sipped quietly. No heavy talks. No old wounds rethreaded. Just two women on a wooden bench watching the light shift across a yard that had been both battlefield and sanctuary. You know what I remembered last night?
Zoe said suddenly.
That story you used to tell me about the garden owl. The one that used to scare the raccoons but only moved when no one was watching. Elaine smiled. Ben swore it winked at him once. I used to think it was magic, Zoe said. Now I think it was warning. Elaine didn't answer, just patted her knee once, then stood and went inside. She returned with a small velvet ring box. Zoe took it without speaking. When she opened it, the air shifted. The band inside was plain gold, worn smooth at the base. Ben's wedding ring. Zoe blinked. Are you sure? Elaine nodded once. It belonged to someone who built, not someone who expected. Zoe turned it over in her palm, her voice low. What do I do with it? Elaine met her eyes. Something he'd be proud of, not something he'd be used for. Zoe closed the box gently, the sound almost reverent. Later that evening, Elaine walked through the house, turning off lights. The hallway was quiet, its shadows soft. She passed the guest room, Mark's old roommate's door, still closed, still untouched. A room that held no memories she wanted, no claims she honored. She paused at the threshold, considered opening it, then didn't. Some spaces stay locked, not out of malice, but because you finally know what not to revisit. She stood by the window in the study, watching the breeze shift the maple leaves outside. Her reflection in the glass looked older than she remembered, but firm, still full. The phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. She didn't play it. Instead, she opened Zoe's root page on her tablet. There was a new post. A woman from Colorado had written, "My daughter called me selfish for changing my will, but for the first time in 20 years, I feel like myself again. My lawyer said it's legal. I know now it's also right." Elaine tapped the screen once, then let it dim. She walked to the kitchen, turned off the kettle, and clicked off the porch light. The lock on the front door clicked into place with a softness that felt like punctuation.
Ow.
In her room, she sat at the edge of the bed, hands folded, the ring box on the nightstand beside her journal. She didn't speak aloud. There was no one left to hear the last line except herself. He said I was rotting, but I outlived the rot and grew something stronger.